Hey folks, back with another video. Let's dive into what stories got my attention today. Starting with an update on the Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict. Azerbaijan said on Thursday that 2,783 of its soldiers were killed during its conflict with the ethnic Armenian forces over the enclave of Nagorno-Karabakh and that more than 100 of its troops were still missing. Now, Azerbaijan had until now not disclosed any of its military losses throughout the conflict, whereas Armenia has not yet disclosed a final death toll for its military, but a health minister official confirmed on November 14 that 2,317 soldiers had been killed. Now, I hope that the Armenian and the Azerbaijani people look at the conflict and the resulting destruction as a push towards peace and some kind of long term agreement on their current whatever the standing issues are between the two countries. Moving on into Pakistan and China's relation, the Chinese Defense Minister Wei Fenghe visited Pakistan on December 1st and met with the country's President Arif Alvi and Prime Minister Imran Khan, along with meeting Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Committee Nadeem Raza and Chief of Army Staff General Qamar Javed Bajwa earlier this week. Wei had also visited Nepal. Writing on Wei's Islamabad trip, China Global Television Network (CGTN) noted him as saying that the quote the China-Pakistan all-weather strategic cooperative partnership is unique in the world, end quote, language consistent with how China publicly describes Pakistan. During Wei's visit, both countries signed a memorandum of agreement around greater defense cooperation. According to CGTN, during Wei's visit, Alvi promised Pakistan support to China across issues including the South China Sea, Taiwan, and Tibet, and also to push ahead with China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. The Hindustan Times quoted Indian experts saying that Wei's Nepal and Pakistan visits were with one eye on India, as New Delhi continues to wrangle with both Kathmandu and Islamabad. The newspaper noted a former Indian ambassador, Vishnu Prakash, who had served in both Pakistan and China, as saying, quote, China was letting Pakistan and Nepal know it is still within them, and this was also a message to India, end quote. Quote, in Islamabad, the Chinese clearly wanted to add some steel to Pakistan's spine, end quote. The Hindustan Times also quoted Prakash as saying. Now, according to the Indian security establishment, China was helping Pakistan install a new surface-to-air missile system in the part of Kashmir it administers. China and Pakistan have a long history of military cooperation, which is included covert Chinese support for Pakistan's nuclear weapons program. However, not all Pakistani analysts are convinced that China and Pakistan would be able or willing to jointly fight a war against India, fears of New Delhi's defense establishment now notwithstanding. Speaking at a virtual event organized by a New Delhi think tank on December 1st, Aisha Siddiqa noted that there is limited interoperability between the militaries of the two countries and that both would not prefer a long conventional war with India. Instead, Siddiqa suggested for Pakistan, China's role is strategic as it manages to do what Pakistan hasn't been able to do, which is keep India in check. Now, I think that the trip by the Chinese Defense Ministry to Pakistan has to be seen as China solidifying and building its sort of a counter alliance that the West is building against Beijing. And while the Chinese alliance is comparatively to the West very weak, but it is, how should we say it, it is the maximum bang for their buck by by whatever, and they China is more thinking in their regional, um, s- sort of within their sphere of influence and within their, let's just say, the which is whatever China considers their backyard or the front yard. That China is building its alliances with its border countries. Anyhow, moving into Iran, the Iran's President Hassan Rouhani on Thursday warned hardliners in parliament against interfering with country's nuclear policy after legislators passed a controversial bill on the matter. Quote, our brothers in the parliament should not make hasty decisions. Let those who know about the diplomacy deal with these issues with the needed maturity, calm, and attention. End quote. Rouhani said on a state television. Now, a bill passed by hardliners on the country's future nuclear policy has sparked an open dispute between the government and legislators. Observers say the hardliners want to sabotage future negotiations between Rouhani and the U.S. President-elect Joe Biden in order to decrease the chances of moderate forces winning in next year's presidential election. The law in question foresees that Iranian Atomic Energy Agency should produce and store 120 kilograms of 20% enriched uranium per year. Now, in the long term, the supply of low enriched uranium is to be increased to 500 kilograms per month, and faster centrifuges are also to be manufactured. The politically sensitive part of the law is Iran's withdrawal from the additional protocol of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which would then also restrict or even prohibit the access to Iran's nuclear sites by UN inspectors. The law violates in all respects the Vienna nuclear agreement, which was intended to deter Iran from a nuclear weapons program in return for the lifting of sanctions. The law passed will not be implemented if sanctions on Tehran are dropped, Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif said on Thursday. Zarif is repeating arguments that Iran is within its rights to reduce compliance with the Vienna nuclear agreement of 2015 after the United States unilaterally pulled out of it and reimposed sanctions on Iran. The European Union did not withdraw from the JCPOA, but in Zarif's eyes, they are also in breach for not doing enough to mitigate the impact of US sanctions on Iran. Now, it seems that the domestic politics of Iran winds up being a split between the hardliner Islamists and the other being the moderate pragmatists. The US policies wind up strengthening the hardliners, especially when the US policy is in line with Israeli policy, while the European aim seems to be towards trying to strengthen the pragmatist, moderate part of Iran. Now, I would urge the West to try to strengthen the moderates and also push for reform in Iran, along with a sort of a cultural reform as well. We need to work on our image as well. Anyhow, moving into France, the French authorities are set to inspect 76 mosques across the country in an unprecedented action against quote unquote separatism, French Interior Minister Gerald Darmanin announced on Thursday. The French government has been planning a new law against separatism which is directed against radical Islamism. The country's cabinet is expected to debate the law next week. The draft law calls for a crackdown on homeschooling and the phasing out of imams trained abroad. President Emmanuel Macron has vowed to combat radical Islamists in places where vulnerable young people are likely to encounter it, in radical mosques, on the street, or online. Several people have been killed in recent terror attacks, sparking another wave of outcry against radical Islam within France. Now, I think that the French government has mostly got the policy right. However, I have some reservation about one point, which is the homeschooling bit. Now, I would like the government to take a very careful step on that realm because it's difficult to monitor such a thing because I believe there is the question of privacy, and are the people going to be safe in their own houses? Because while the law may start out as against Islamism, the law winds up being the the law basically has this tendency that if it can be used for evil, it winds up being used for evil, and I fear that that particular part of the law will in the future will have a much more deeper impact on the French society overall and not just the Muslims in the French community. Moving on into Hong Kong, the Hong Kong media tycoon Jimmy Lai was remanded in custody on Thursday after being charged with fraud, the latest in a string of prosecutions brought against the high-profile Beijing critics and democracy campaigners. He and two of the firm executives, Royston Chow and Wong Wai-kyung, face fraud charges that court documents say are related to the paper's offices allegedly being used for purposes not permitted by the building's lease. None has so far been charged with any national security breaches, but Victor So, the magistrate overseeing Thursday's hearing, is from a group of judges selected by Hong Kong's chief executive to try such cases. So denied Lai bail but granted it to Wong and Chow, setting the next court date for April. The decision means Lai, who was later photographed arriving at prison with his hands cuffed, faces months behind bars as police continue their investigation. Lai is also being prosecuted for his alleged part in pro-democracy rallies in a separate prosecution. Radio DJ Tam Tak Chi has been in custody since mid-September after he became the first person since the 1997 handover from Britain to be charged with the quote-unquote uttering seditious words under a colonial-era law. At a hearing on Thursday, he was denied bail again ahead of his trial in May. The crackdown has provoked outrage in the West and fear for millions who last year took to the streets to protest Communist China's tightening grip on the semi-autonomous city. Beijing says stability and order has been restored and dismissed the huge crowds that protested as a foreign plot to destabilize China. Critics say Beijing has shredded the freedoms and the autonomy of Hong Kong that was promised ahead of his handover by Britain. Lai has long said he fears authorities want to shutter his newspaper, one of the few local outlets still willing to vocally take on Beijing. In Chinese state media, he is routinely cast as a traitor and quote-unquote black hand. Now, it's no secret that Beijing is stifling the treasured freedoms of Hong Kong, and Hong Kong is fighting for its freedom, and by extension, I believe, their very existence and their way of life. I believe that we in the West must push for Beijing to honor their side of the agreement and also resist the Xi Jinping agenda in China. Well, that's it for this video. If you like the video, then hit that like button and hit that subscribe button for future updates. Write in the comment sections your thoughts, criticism, and anything I might have missed. And I will see you in the next video.